Hello everyone, welcome to Primus Learning. It's Aziz here today, and we are going to be discussing about AWS Simple Storage Service called S3. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the various IAM identities, and then we also saw a hands-on where we looked at how to create IAM users, how to create IAM policies, and how to manage IAM groups. So today we are going to be talking about storage. So what exactly is AWS S3? First, when companies, after moving to the cloud, or companies that have just started implementation and are basically beginning everything in the cloud, most of the time, most often companies always usually think of how are we going to be able to store our data, right? Because remember, companies are running applications. Generally, all companies are basically just running applications. So say, for example, we have a social media application. When this social media application is running, because this is software, right? This is code. When this application is running, for example, it generates something that are called log files, right? In addition to this, we also have the database. We also have the database backups. So we can say we have DB backups. In addition to database backups, you might also just have some data that is meant for analytics, right? So whenever you have a system like this, when it's running, it's going to be generating these types of information, it's generating this data. Now, you basically need to think about it this way. A company needs to be able to store this data, maybe for archiving purposes, because they want to, keep it if they ever need it. So maybe they want to do some analytics on this data, right? Maybe it's just backups of their database that they want to store and be able to retrieve these backups, later on if they ever need it. So then you have log data that is coming from the various applications. They might want to be able to, build some analysis on these logs also, and be able to stream the logs and do all sorts of things. So this is data that companies are generating, right? We need to look at ways. Also, you have things like not just this, but you also have things like images, videos. Okay, you have things like images, and you have things like videos that these companies are also using on their various websites. Say, for example, streaming applications like Netflix and all the like. They have they have images, videos, the movies, and all those things. They are definitely sitting in a particular storage, right? So we want to be able to store these things somewhere, and not just in any type of storage location, but we need a storage location that is going to be highly available, is going to be very, very scalable, right? And then it's going to be very, very secure. So these are the questions that companies are asking when they want to choose a storage service. So AWS offers us a storage service that is called AWS Simple Storage Service, called AWS S3 Simple Storage Service. The S is for the three S's, Simple Storage and Service. So with AWS S3 now, we can now be able to bring all our data and store it in our S3 storage. We can bring all our data and store it inside AWS S3. So AWS S3 is what we call an object storage. AWS S3 is what we call an object storage. Whenever we talk about object storage is generally in tech, it basically means that it's a storage that basically it accepts large amounts of unstructured data, right? That is what an object storage is. So AWS S3 is an example of an object storage. Now, how does AWS S3 work? AWS S3 has a concept of what we call buckets. When we are working with AWS S3, we have a concept of what we call buckets. Say, for example, this is your S3. This is your S3 service. This is going to be your bucket. And inside your bucket now, we now need to create something that is called an object. So in AWS S3, we have buckets, and in our buckets, we have objects. So this is your AWS S3. Here you have the bucket. And the bucket has a name because that is how you'll be able to access it. So you have the bucket, and then inside you have what we call objects. We'll do it this way, like this. So this is an object, and then you have a bucket. So this is basically how AWS S3 works. So in AWS S3, you create what we call a bucket, and then in your bucket, and what is exactly is a bucket? A bucket is just typically is just the name that you provide to this storage folder, and then also maybe the region where you want where you want to be able to store your data. And then what is an object? Our object now is the real data that we are